This is the new 2022 Nissan Pathfinder, and it's been completely redesigned from last year. If you're looking for a Toyota Highlander or a Kia Telluride, the Pathfinder may not have been on your list before, but the new one should be. And today I'm going to review the new Pathfinder and explain why. Before I get started, be sure to check out Cars and Bids, which is my enthusiast car auction website with cool cars from the modern era, now with free listings. You can sell your cool modern enthusiast car for free and auction it on Cars and Bids. And we've had some great sales recently, including this Mercedes E63 AMG wagon, which sold for just under $50,000. This fantastic new Acura NSX in orange, which sold for over $130,000, and this beautiful Mitsubishi 3000 GT VR4 Spider, which brought $40,000. If you're looking to buy or sell a cool modern enthusiast car from the 1980s and up, Cars and Bids is the place to do it. Check it out at carsandbids.com. I've borrowed this new Pathfinder from Universal City Nissan here in Los Angeles. Universal City Nissan has all of the latest Nissan models, including the new Pathfinder, which has been difficult to find. They're in short supply, demand has been high, but you can find one at Universal City Nissan. You can click the link in the description below to check out Universal City Nissan and see their inventory. So let's talk Pathfinder. The original Pathfinder came out back in the 1980s, and back then it was like a trucky SUV, more geared towards off-roading than family hauling. That changed with the last Pathfinder model, which transitioned from off-roader SUV to like a family crossover. But the outgoing Pathfinder was really mediocre. It was starting to get old, and it was vastly outclassed by rivals that had better technology, better powertrains, better just about everything. But the new Pathfinder has new tech, new styling, new everything. It's a totally new car, and it looks like the Pathfinder might finally be competitive again. And today I'll show you everything. First, I'll take you on a thorough tour of the new Pathfinder and show you all of its quirks and features. Then I'll get it out on the road and drive it, and then I'll give it a DOUGSCORE. All right, I'm going to start the quirks and features of the new Pathfinder on the inside with this interior, which is a massive upgrade over the interior in the old Pathfinder. Everything here is way better. The materials, of course, but also just the design, the layout, the style of this interior. It's way more stylish than before. Everything is radically improved and heavily modernized, and there are some great examples of that. One is the old Pathfinder had a foot-mounted parking brake still, which is very old school. This thing has this little electronic lever like modern vehicles tend to have, which is a big improvement. The old Pathfinder didn't have a wireless charging pad, even though that's been common in family crossovers for years. The new one finally does, bringing it into the modern era. And the old Pathfinder's center infotainment screen was utterly ancient, absolutely horrible, old school, terrible to use. This one is a lot better than the old one, and I'll get to infotainment technology in a minute. But the overarching theme in here is a radical improvement over the outgoing model. But anyway, on to some of the quirks. One you notice right away, and it's another modernization, that would be the gear selector, which is this little stubby thing right in the middle. Operates kind of strangely. To get it into gear, you push a little button on the side and then pull down and you go into drive, and then it sort of pops back into its normal position. Reverse is the opposite. You push forward and then it pops back into its normal position, and neutral is in the middle, and then to put it in park, you press the button on top. This is a big benefit over the outgoing Pathfinder, which had like an old school gear lever. You moved between gears. Now it's this little weird modern thing. And next up, another interesting quirk in this interior is storage. You have the glove box, of course, but right above that, there's a little storage tray where you can put stuff, and it's surprisingly deep. Like, I can fit almost my whole hand in here. It's surprising how much stuff you could put in there if you wanted, although there's no like cover for it. It'll fly around under heavy acceleration or quick movements, but there is a storage compartment there. And there's another cool storage location underneath the center console. You can see down here, you have a pretty big storage compartment compartment where you can put stuff, and you still have access to all the usual center console items, including another storage compartment in the actual center console itself, and then that extra one underneath. So there's a lot of good storage in the new Pathfinder. And next up, another nice feature in the front of the new Pathfinder is how easy it is to control the rear climate control from up here. To turn it on or off, you just press this button, rear on off, and then to control it, you tap rear control, and then you can use the front climate controls to control the back. This seems like a fairly simple thing to do, but most automakers get this wrong. A lot of times rear climate controls are buried in the infotainment screen, or they're just harder to access, but it's easy here to adjust the rear climate controls in case your backseat passengers are babies or toddlers and they can't do it themselves. With that said, speaking of back seats, one feature I'm disappointed didn't make it into the Pathfinder is the ability to drop the third row seats while you're sitting in front. That feature is offered on Nissan's larger Armada SUV. You just press a button up here and the third row seats fold down instantly, and it'd be great to have in the Pathfinder too. It's a big selling point, but unfortunately it doesn't have it. Too bad. But anyway, next up we move on to the infotainment system. I have to say, this is a vast improvement over the infotainment in the prior Pathfinder, but I will also say it's not quite as good as infotainment tech in some of its rivals, including the new Ford Explorer, the Kia Telluride, and a few others. A couple of problems I have with this system. For one, the screen is pretty small, not as big as Telluride or Explorer. Also, it lacks like a true home screen, which I find to be interesting. In a lot of new cars, you have a home screen that will show you like your road you're traveling and your music you're listening to and your phone settings all in one, but this doesn't have that. You have to kind of choose between which of those things you want to see at any given moment, rather than just like a general overview screen, which most other cars have, and that's a drawback here. Another drawback, frankly, it's just not quite as responsive as the very best infotainment screens. When you tap a button or select something on the screen, it just doesn't quite respond like that smartphone speed that you've come to expect from phones and most other infotainments. But while I don't quite think the infotainment system in the center is as good as some rivals, I have almost entirely positive things to say about the screen in the gauge cluster, which is pretty impressive. Most mid-size SUVs don't have a full screen gauge cluster, but this one does. More of a feature you see in luxury models, and this gauge cluster screen is very useful and very configurable. This is its default setting with these full-sized gauges, or you can adjust this screen to show the gauges in more of a vertical format, which is kind of unusual, frankly, but the benefit there is it prioritizes what's on the screen in the center. That's sort of an info screen, and it can be configured to show pretty much whatever you want to see. You can look at like your trip odometer info, you can look at your car safety systems, your music or media that's playing, and you can also have that screen in the center show your navigation directions if you have the navigation system leading you somewhere. Unfortunately, you can't have a map in that screen unless you have the navigation directions on, which I think is a mistake. Sometimes I like to just see a map there without having to have the nav system lead me somewhere, but still a very configurable, very useful gauge cluster. My only other complaint with this gauge cluster screen is that it doesn't do anything different when you change the drive modes. You can adjust the drive modes with this little switch here in the center console, and there are a few different modes, but when you change them, nothing really happens in the gauge cluster. It doesn't make it seem sportier in sport mode or eco-ier in eco mode, and that would be a nice touch. But overall, fantastic gauge cluster and a big advantage over some rivals. And just in case the center screen and the gauge cluster aren't enough info for you, this Pathfinder, the Platinum trim, also has a heads-up display, which adds even more stuff. You can see your speedometer, etc., projected onto the windshield directly in your line of sight, which adds even more information and is great, a great feature. But anyway, next up we move on to the back seat in the new Pathfinder, and I gotta say, the first thing you notice when you get back here is it's roomy. There's a lot of space in the back seat. A lot of space for legs, a lot of space for heads. It is a roomy interior. And you can see that this back seat is set up with dual captain's chairs back here, which is the popular new way to equip SUVs. 2 bucket seats as opposed to a bench in back, although a bench seat is also available. But regardless, back seat really roomy. And there's a lot of other stuff to like in this back seat as well. For one thing, rear seat climate controls. You can see full access, including rear heated seats, which is a nice feature to have. With that said, one interesting drawback of the rear climate controls, there's no rear climate vents mounted in the center. Usually they're on the back of the front center console, but not in the new Pathfinder. Your rear climate vents are only mounted on the ceiling, sort of on the side of the seats, which is fine. You have your own climate zone back here. You can control the air temperature and the air flow, but you just don't get that much air because you don't have those center vents. A little bit of a disappointment. I also like the rear seat charge points, and you have one of each thing: USB-C, USB-A, and a household style power outlet, which is a really nice feature, becoming more and more common in family SUVs, but not every family SUV has it, and it's a nice thing to have. I also like in the backseat of the new Pathfinder the sheer volume of cup holders back here. You have 2 cup holders in this center storage compartment, but there's a lot more than that. For some reason, a lot of automakers are hesitant to put cup holders on the door panels, but Nissan is not. You have 2 on each side, driver and passenger, for a total of 6 cup holders back here. Plus, you have like little water bottle holders also in the door panels for even more drink holding capabilities. So there is a lot of drinks that can be held in the back seat. And by the way, speaking of the door panels, one other nice feature in here is an integrated sunshade for the door panel. You can see here, you lift it up and then you stick it in place, and there's your sunshade, which can be helpful if you have like a little infant who's sensitive to sun. You don't have to like stick one on, you have one actually built into the car, which is nice to see. But to me, the very best part about the back seat has nothing to do with actually sitting in it. Instead, it's how easy it is to move the back seat out of the way to access the third row. All you gotta do, there's a little button on the side of the seat, you can see it there. All you gotta do, push it, and then the seat does everything else for you. Now it's folded forward and it creates a path for you to get into the third row. There's no latch that you have to pull. There's no 2-step process. Do one thing with a latch, one thing with a button. You just push the button on the side and the seat folds forward. Easiest in the industry, and you'll notice the seat has kept its shape, meaning that if you have a car seat or a car seat base in here, you don't have to pull that out for easy access to the third row. You just push that button, everything folds forward, and you get in. And if you're in the third row, getting out is just as easy. There's another button mounted on the back of the second row seat. You push that and the very same thing happens. As you can see, it just folds forward and then you can climb right out. Incredibly easy, fantastic feature of the new Pathfinder. And you'll notice with the seat folded forward, there's a pretty good pathway for you to be able to climb into the third row, as I will now demonstrate. You just move right back and then you're in. And here you go. Now, I will say in the third row, obviously not especially huge back here. This is a mid-size SUV, not a full size, and so the third row is not really intended for adults to use in any long period of time, but there is a third row, and there are some nice amenities back here. For one thing, you have power ports on each side of the third row, which is pretty nice. No fighting over just one power port, and you have multiple cup holders on each side of the third row. The new Pathfinder is just loaded with cup holders. That was clearly a big priority when designing this vehicle for Nissan. Also, one other amenity worth noting, you do have climate vents back here, which is a nice touch. Some mid-size SUVs with 3-row seating have climate vents and some don't, but this one does add some air to your third row passengers. Pretty nice. And next up, we move on to the cargo area of the Pathfinder. And to get into the cargo area, there's a little button to the left of the steering wheel you can press and pop open the tailgate, or there's a button on the key fob, or if the key fob's in your pocket, you can do one of these little jigs and then the back will open. Most SUVs have that now, but it's cool to see. If your hands are full, you can just do that and get back here without touching anything. Anyway, the cargo area. Now behind the third row, there's actually pretty decent space back here. It's not huge, of course, but for a mid-size SUV, this is good storage space behind the third row of seats. And you can lift up the cargo floor and you can see a pretty deep secondary cargo area underneath the floor, and it's separated into little compartments in case you want to put like dirty stuff in one and clean stuff in another or whatever. That's pretty good storage space back here. Now, as for dropping the third row of seats, it's a pretty easy process, though it's made slightly more cumbersome by the fact that you have to do each headrest individually. A little loop on the headrest 1 and then headrest 2, and then you can use this little latch to pop down the seat and then it's down, and that's all pretty simple. And of course you do that over on the other side, headrest first, little latch, and then the seat goes down. It's all pretty easy, nothing too complicated, though the headrest does make it a little bit more challenging. Once the seat is down, getting it back up is also very easy. You don't have to like reach all the way in and grab the seat because you have this strap that sticks out from the seat. You pull on that and then the seat goes right back into its normal position, and that's lowering and raising the third row. Now, a lot of luxury SUVs have a feature where you can just press a button and the third row will go down. That's not offered on the Pathfinder or on most other mainstream brand midsize SUVs. That's a cool feature to have, but frankly, it's faster to do it this way, to drop the seats using the latches. It's all really easy and really simple. Now, one interesting drawback to the Pathfinder, you can't lower the second row seats from the cargo area. A lot of other midsize SUVs, there's a little button off to the side, you press, and the second row will go down. Not so here. If you want to drop the second row seats in the Pathfinder, you have to go around to both seats individually and lower them. With that said, one nice Pathfinder advantage back here, you can see at the bottom of the tailgate there are two buttons, one to close the tailgate and the other has a lock on it. If you press that, the tailgate will close and then the whole vehicle will lock, which is a nice feature. You can press that and then just walk away without having to wait for it to close and press a lock button on a key fob. I mention this because not all rivals have a lock button on the tailgate. I was just in the new Jeep Grand Cherokee, great vehicle, no lock button on the tailgate, but this has it, which is a nice feature and adds a little bit to convenience when you're walking away. And next up we move up front. Nissan is known for its powerful and reliable V6 engines, and this one is no different. 3.5 liter V6, about 285 horsepower. That was the same engine from the old Pathfinder, and it's just fine, very competitive in terms of horsepower, engine size, etc. The benefit here is for the new Pathfinder, they've ditched the CVT automatic transmission, which was kind of a drawback, got a lot of complaints in the old model. They went with a 9-speed automatic instead, which will probably smooth out the driving experience and maybe enhance reliability a little bit. And next up, since I'm outside the new Pathfinder, I want to talk styling. I like how the new Pathfinder looks. I think it's nice, I think it's reasonable, not ugly at all. In fact, looks pretty good, but I don't think it's quite tough enough. By far the most popular, most talked about new midsize SUV is the Kia Telluride, and people love how tough and muscular and boxy it looks. I have 4 friends who have Tellurides. 3 of them went out of state to get one because they are so hard to find. When I asked them, why did you go to all this trouble to get a Telluride when you could easily get a Hyundai Palisade, which is the same car, they all say the same thing. It just looks better. The Telluride is what everybody wants. Everybody likes that brawny, muscular look, and the Pathfinder doesn't have it. Now, they've made some changes to make it a little bit more muscular, like this rear hip line that kind of gives it sort of an aggressive, bolder look, but it just doesn't have that Telluride look to it. And frankly, I'm actually surprised Nissan doesn't go boxier and bolder with the design of the Pathfinder, because they still have some of that reputation, those original Pathfinders that were so tough and off-roady, and they could cash in on that. Plus the name Pathfinder, it could really give this sort of a brawny feel, but they just decided not to do it. With that said, like I said, pretty good looking. The very best angle in my opinion is the rear 3/4, which looks pretty neat. You have this two-tone roof versus body and this wraparound looking rear window thanks to the black trim. It almost has a Land Rover look in back, but just not quite muscular enough. And next up, still outside the Pathfinder, moving on from a general discussion of styling to some of its interesting exterior quirks and features, starting with the logo, which is now different. The Nissan emblem has changed. You can see it's white trimmed and a little bit more modernized compared to the old Nissan logo, which is here. Definitely looks different from what you're used to. Apparently this change actually happened a year ago and I hadn't noticed. I don't review a lot of new Nissan products. Most of them aren't that compelling, but the Pathfinder is, and it has a new logo. Now, one other interesting item in the front is the fog lights, which are ridiculous. Look how tiny these two little fog lights are. With LED lights, you don't really need massive headlight housings anymore to make good lighting power, so this makes sense, but it's kind of funny to see these tiny fog lights. And speaking of lighting up front, a couple interesting things with the headlights. For one, you can see the running light sort of separates itself from the headlight and kind of goes up the fender, which is an interesting design detail, and it looks kind of cool. I'm a little disappointed, unfortunately, with the turn signals, which are halogen turn signals all around instead of LEDs. I think this is a mistake. The Kia Telluride has done this really cool LED light signature in front that makes them very recognizable and desirable when you see them on the road. A big upgrade from the standard halogens in this that just don't look that distinctive or special. And finally, I want to talk rear styling briefly because there's some interesting things going on back here. For one thing, this is definitely the area of the new Pathfinder that looks the most muscular and brawny and tough. They've given it intentionally some small taillights and sort of a big slab on the tailgate, uninterrupted by a license plate or a handle, because they wanted it to seem bigger visually than it really is back here. And this area, when you see it from behind, is probably where you say, ooh, that new Pathfinder looks so tough. Unfortunately, it doesn't quite carry through to the rest of the car. Now, the other notable item back here is Pathfinder, spelled out across the tailgate in huge letters, making everybody very aware of what this vehicle is. And that also has sort of a toughness to it, like those old trucks that used to have the brand name spelled across the back. Now you have the Pathfinder. And so those are the quirks and features of the new 2022 Nissan Pathfinder. Now it's time to get it out on the road and see how it drives. All right, driving the new Pathfinder. You know, a lot of people think that reviewing the supercars and sports cars is like my favorite thing in the world, but actually I really love reviewing mid-size SUVs because they're all so similar that these little things they have to do to differentiate themselves is very interesting. And when I spend time with each new one, it's kind of interesting to check it all out and see, oh, this is better here, this is better there, whatever. And since I have been around pretty much all of the mid-size SUVs now, I'm just going to tell it to you straight. Here are the benefits and drawbacks of the Pathfinder. Okay, to me, the drawbacks are threefold. Number one, I don't think the infotainment is as good as Rivals. Like I said, Rivals have a bigger screen, and frankly, they just have a better system. Lack of a home screen is weird here too. I also just don't think it looks that like fresh and modern and cool. The font looks a little old school. It's a little less responsive than some. It's just not, frankly, it's just not as good. Now, with that said, the gauge cluster screen is better. It's an improvement. So you kind of have to decide which one of those you prioritize. But to me, that's the biggest drawback. Tech is a little bit behind Rivals, but a lot better than the old Pathfinder. Number two, big drawback to this vehicle, I think, is the way that it looks. I like how it looks, like I said, but it just doesn't have that muscular look that's really selling right now. Telluride has it, Explorer has it to a lesser extent, but it does. Atlas maybe even has a little bit more of a brawny look than this. It's just not quite on the level of what people are really, really wanting these days. And I do think that's going to hurt it. Nissan just wasn't willing to take that risk and go bolder, and it would have paid off for them. To me, the third big drawback is just the name recognition of the brand. You know, the Nissan Pathfinder has not been a desirable SUV for a long time. It's been several generations, actually, since like 03, 04. People were really interested in these cars. And I think that, you know, it's going to be a little bit tough to make up some of that recognition against Toyota Highlander, even Kia Telluride, which has made a real name for itself very quickly. And I think that's going to be a bit of a tough sell. Oh, I bought a Nissan Pathfinder, really? And Nissan, you know, it's just not quite on that level. And speaking of which, by the way, I checked, I haven't reviewed a new Nissan in over 3 years. There are just not that many interesting new Nissans. I think I did the 370Z more recently than that, but it was not a new car. This is the first like really desirable Nissan product in a little while. And actually, I'm getting a little excited for Nissan's future because they have the Z coming now too, which will probably be cool, and the new Frontier is finally coming, so there's some good stuff on the horizon for Nissan, but this is probably the best. But okay, so let's talk driving experience. Truthfully, there's not much to talk about, and that's true of all these mid-sized family SUVs. You know, they're not that exciting, and that's by design. You know, you get exciting, you get sporty handling, well, that comes at the expense of ride quality, and it costs a lot more money, and blah, blah, blah. You're looking at a car in this segment, you don't really want exciting. That's not really the thing. But this drives a lot like you'd expect. It's a crossover, it has a reasonably car-like ride and driving experience. The steering and handling is not particularly inspired, but again, that's kind of what people are looking for in this segment, and that's certainly not a drawback about this compared to the others. They're all like that. In fact, I think this is a little bit sharper in terms of steering and handling than the Highlander. I don't really have any complaints about the driving experience, but also nothing like too amazing to say about it either. It's ultimately a good vehicle that delivers exactly what's promised, which, by the way, leads me to the benefits of this car, which are vastly improved over the old one. Good interior styling, good interior materials. Everything looks nice in here. This is the Platinum model, sort of the top end, and it's great. The real benefits, though, to me are in the back. I'm really impressed with rear seat room, with all those cup holders, with all those charge ports, and I love how easy it is to access the third row. And cargo space is good too, that cargo area behind the third row and the lower cargo floor. A lot of good stuff here. Also good in this car is the engine, the powertrain. Quick, muscular, feels nice, especially compared to its rivals. It's a good engine. I do wish that they offered a hybrid version. Hybrid Highlander is about a quarter of Highlander sales. Not really enough for a smaller brand like Nissan to develop maybe, but it would be nice if you could get a little better gas mileage. This is in the low to mid 20s combined city and highway, which is okay, but not great. But overall, I think this is a very good vehicle. And frankly, I think it's competitive. And it's the first Nissan in this segment that's been competitive. The old Pathfinder came out in 2013, and it was pretty good for a couple years, but it's been a long time. And finally, they have something here that's really desirable and competitive. And I think it will stand up strong against Telluride, Highlander, and the big players in this segment. And so that's the new 2022 Nissan Pathfinder. I'm impressed with this. This is a good vehicle. After a decade of Nissan not really putting any effort into the Pathfinder in spite of massively rising SUV sales, they've finally created something great with the new 22 Pathfinder. And this is a strong competitor to the Kia Telluride, the Highlander, the Ford Explorer, and it should be on your family SUV shop shopping list. Anyway, now it's time to give the new Pathfinder a DOUGSCORE. Starting with the weekend categories and styling, the new Pathfinder looks fine, like a crossover, not as attractive or bold as the Kia Telluride, but good enough, and it gets a 5 out of 10. Acceleration, it's normal for a midsize SUV at 1 out of 10. Handling is again normal for a midsize SUV at 3 out of 10. Same deal with fun factor, this isn't exactly fun, nor is it intended to be, and it gets a 1 out of 10. Cool factor too, not really cool, not really intended to be, 1 out of 10 for a total weekend score of 11 out of 50. Next up are the daily categories and features. The Pathfinder has everything you'd expect from a midsize crossover these days, nothing especially crazy or wowing, but all the nice stuff, and it gets a 7 out of 10. Comfort is nice, normal for a good midsize SUV, and it gets a 7 out of 10. Same deal with quality, it's nice inside, but not particularly amazing, good enough, and it gets a 7 out of 10. Practicality is strong given the seats and the cargo space, and it gets a 9 out of 10. Finally, value, and again great, but not amazing or insanely wowing, and it gets a 7 out of 10 for a total daily score of 37 out of 50. Added up, and the DOUGSCORE is 48 out of 100, which places the Pathfinder here against rivals. As you can see, it stacks up well, hanging with the Kia Telluride, the Hyundai Palisade, the Subaru Ascent, and the Toyota Highlander. Frankly, I think the new Pathfinder is Nissan's best new vehicle in a while, and a great choice for a family SUV. I would still get a Telluride first, only due to the styling and the coolness, but really, the Pathfinder nearly equals the Telluride in cargo space, interior room tech, all the ways that really matter for a family SUV.